Okay, welcome everybody to our webinar. I'm Jeff Komar from Avid, and very excited to have you here with us for the next hour or so. Super excited to really kind of dig into immersive audio with Dolby Atmos, specifically for music, for jazz. And we've got a special guest with us today that I'll introduce here in a second. Just kind of want to lay out a little bit of the some of the basic information. We have some other associates of mine from Avid on the line. Certainly are able to feed questions into the chat, and we will. They can answer them directly in the chat. Otherwise, if something is more relevant to everybody, we will actually field some of those for Mark a little bit later in the presentation. So please feel free to interact with us. Just to kind of, my objective for this today is to kind of give a balanced view of not just the technology, but kind of the aesthetic and creative approach, and really kind of want to really talk about, how the technology serves the art. And so that's really what I want to split this between is a little bit of tech, a little bit of aesthetics, and really some practical information too. There's a lot of people, I know all of us on our team are getting asked every day about, want to start working in Dolby Atmos for music. And so it's coming up constantly. So we're going to dig in. So the first thing I want to do real quick here is just talk about Avid's solutions. We've been doing this for quite a while, and this started with theatrical, with cinematic, but we offer really comprehensive solutions for working in immersive audio. And that is either putting together a very simple Atmos rig or something very comprehensive for larger workflows, including IOs and patching and monitoring and listening in multi-channel immersive, and then being able to manage and control all of those elements with an intelligent surface. Certainly when you start working in immersive audio, it can be challenging. There can be a lot of pieces to manage, and spatially placing a large number of elements, whether it's music or post, can be challenging. And we offer solutions from really essentially free with the Avid Control app, which runs on iOS or Android, all the way up to our flagship S6 consoles, which are absolutely built from the ground up to really allow you to visualize and harness immersive audio in Dolby Atmos. So just wanted to kind of lay out a little bit of the solutions. We're going to talk some more as we kind of get into this about the technology. But without further ado, based in the north of London, and originally hailing from my area in the Midwest, Mark Gustafson is an independent engineer and producer who's worked on numerous immersive audio projects in Dolby Atmos. He's been working through lockdown actually to really focus on recording and mixing in Dolby Atmos. His latest project, which we're going to actually look at some tracks from, is a jazz quartet, which is the Carabaldus Merriman quartet. And we're going to take a look at that and some of the tracks that he's been working on. He says that he's super excited about working in this format and kind of been recharged to really engage back into not just jazz, but a lot of other genres. Please welcome Mark Gustafson.
Hello.
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm well. How are you, Jeff?
Awesome. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah, of course.
So just to kind of kick it off, why don't you talk about how were you introduced to Dolby Atmos? What was the first thing that you were, kind of heard and really kind of started you on this journey?
The thing that started me was a band that wanted to do something more immersive, and they wanted to write a project for that. And I think the original idea was that it was going to be for VR. And the further and further we went down that, it was, well, now we have to get visuals involved and all of these things. It was like, we just want to make some music. And Atmos seemed to be the ticket. So it started to, how can I listen to as much as possible what material is out there? So Elton John, Rocket Man comes to mind.
Amazing.
Around maybe a little bit deeper into that, the Pearl Jam record that came out. And they had visuals as well through Apple TV. So that was a really easy way to kind of check it out and say, oh, I see how this could be used creatively, not just like Elton John, an up mix.
Mhm. Yeah. So you are from the Midwest, which I'm from, and you spent a lot of time with Cheap Trick. So I wanted to just briefly talk about your experience working on that orchestral Dream Police concert, and also I know they did a whole Sergeant Pepper's live thing. So what was your kind of experience with that?
I was the front of house orchestra, so I mixed with Bill Cozy, the band's front of house engineer. And
Hmm.
yeah, it was for an anniversary of Dream Police. So we did the entire Dream Police record, giant video wall with an 18-piece orchestra up
Hmm.
above them, backup singers, incredible stuff. And we did multiple runs in Milwaukee. Also did the Greek Theater, few spot
Awesome.
shows here and there. But yeah,
Hmm.
one of the last things I got to do was uh, the Sergeant Pepper show at Ravinia outside of Chicago. So it was a
Yep.
really cool way to I got to play with every single one of their large experiences like that. And they're just, the best rock and roll band ever. So a
Awesome.
lot of hometown pride, but yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant.
Absolutely. So I wanted to call out just briefly. We're going to work with or take a look at some of these sessions that the last project that Mark just worked on again, which is this jazz quartet. So just wanted to call up out the both the musicians, the performers, as well as the engineers and the studio owners. This was done in a studio in St. Louis. Is that correct?
Yes, Midtown Soundhouse. Beautiful space. They have a wonderful tracking room, API console, all the outboard gear you could imagine. Lovely mic locker, and I was there to help them set up their B room to be an Atmos rig. So now they have an Atmos setup and a mastering room. So a really nice facility with a flat upstairs that I was actually able to stay at. It was very comfortable.
Very cool. So I want to dig back into that in a little bit, but before we get
Sure.
there, I want to talk about Atmos, and everybody's all now obviously really enthused about the creative potential and listening, and obviously there's loudspeakers and there's binaural and listening on AirPod Pros, and obviously now that Apple's jumped into the pool, it's a whole different conversation. And so I guess my first question is, what was it what do you find compelling, unique? Why did you jump into Atmos? And what is it about it that you find compelling?
Sure. I like to stack things. I like kind of a built up track by track wall of sound. So it's not wall of sound where you're all getting in a room and exploding it, but I tend to stack a lot. But I lose a lot of definition, and
Hmm.
you miss it. And as much as I like the soup of all of that, it's nice to know that all of these individual performances and all of these tones that we spent forever getting can be heard. And working
Hmm.
in Atmos it's just incredible to have, oh, well, there it is right there. It definitely adds to it. You can explode your own room, you
Hmm.
recreate
Yeah.
that. Uh,
Hmm.
but you have the definition and you get that depth for free, things that you'd have to spend, what, 3 or 4 different processing chains just to get that depth that you get for free.
Hmm.
You just place it and make it larger or smaller, closer or further. It's wonderful that way. It's incredibly flexible, non-genre dependent, which I think is incredibly key. If it's
Hmm.
going to be a widespread delivery system, it has to kind of work for everyone, and I truly believe it does.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I like how well it translates system to system. It's always been the struggle, of course, that you have multiple monitors, small, big, boombox, whatever it would be, just to make sure that it would translate, and it never does, really. It's
Hmm.
kind of, and you just try to do the lesser of any evils.
Sure.
With Atmos, you can really hone it in, and I could be in a very different room on a very different system and say, yeah, that sounds like my mix,
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
varying degrees, of course, but
Hmm.
I mean, it sounds like my mix. This sounds right. And I really
Sure.
enjoy that aspect of it as well. Scalable.
Awesome. Excellent. Kind of Blue, it's an album that I've heard a million times and then re-experienced it in Atmos. And I think Steve Genowick mixed it at Capitol. And it's just we'll kind of get back into some conversations about space, both real and artificial space. But it's like this, blanket of sound being wrapped around you. It's fun to be in that space and listen to that. It's something you've heard a million times, but you're hearing it differently. So for me, I think that's really unique.
Getting a fresh perspective on a record that already meant so much to you is key. Kind of Blue does that. I think that a lot of the Beatles Atmos mixes do that as well. It's like, I know every aspect of this, and yet this is new. I can enjoy this as a listener again, not dissecting all the little things. And
right. Yeah. And I think we'll
really
come
cool.
back to that concept about the art, the aesthetic versus the technology, right? And, certainly if we're mixing a major laser album or something, we want to just do crazy stuff with elements and moving things, then we can do that. But hopefully you're making choices aesthetically that are appropriate for the genre, appropriate for the musician to really push the emotion and the appropriate nature of the art. So
Exactly.
So I just wanted to quickly, just because there's going to be some tech sprinkled in here, but I wanted to just kind of say, we have a very wide range of how you can start with Atmos and then how you can, just really go crazy with it. I just wanted to say, basically, you can start with a laptop, Pro Tools Ultimate, and Dolby Atmos Production Suite, and literally a pair of headphones that you trust, and start actually doing full Atmos. And that is totally viable. And that's really kind of using the binaural renderer. But it's the start at working, in this format. So just kind of want to present that. And then we have to go to the other extreme because that's what I like. That's what I like to do, just to show that, yeah, we've been doing Atmos for a long time for theatrical and really massive workflows with lots of computers and matrix and all this kind of thing. So we can scale really massively, but I just want to show, kind of a little bit about the span of where you can go with that. So I wanted to ask you, we kind of come back to the studio in St. Louis, just about your experience. I know you flew to St. Louis from London, and you had to build an environment that you could work in immersive, and that sounds relatively simple, but not, because you have to be able to trust what you're hearing in that environment. So just can you talk briefly about setting up a rig in Midtown and something that you can trust and work in immersive audio?
Sure. On the mixing end or on the tracking end?
My perspective is kind of monitoring, being able to actually kind of hear, which, you know what I mean? If you're going to start actually thinking about things in 714 or whatever format you're working in, you have to be confident, right, to be able to listen to loudspeakers and headphones and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So there is a little bit of blindness being in Studio One, and then Studio Two being the one that we set up for. There was we tracked the first day, so there was a lot of we're doing this, and you'll see why. When we set up the room, it was measuring. It's saying, what's your loudness? What is your preferred listening environment? There was a lot of, this is how you will actually tune the room. They were actually going through some further renovations. The room was quite decently set up. It was a nice space to begin with. But that's the thing, you can go through and tune further. So it's knowing where are your speakers. There was a lot of pre-planning. So how far away are things? Do you need any delays? Do you need any major EQing, or is it really delicate? Do you even like that? Sometimes it's not even nice to have all that much. Yeah, you might be making it more flat, but it's that's not really what the curve is. It's what feels comfortable to listen to.
Sure.
And so
you had a 714. You had a 714 set of Atoms, right, in the primary. Yeah.
I have 7.4 Atoms. At Midtown, they have Dyne Audios.
Okay.
They went with Dyne Audios. I have Atoms for my setup here at home.
Got it. Okay. So you have a somewhat similar rig at home. Also.
Yeah, that was really comfortable. So being able to speak to the engineer for setup as well as getting through this mix process, it was, we have very similar setups. It does this. and it translates incredibly well, even though we're in massively different rooms. They have a nice, purpose-built studio, and I'm in my front room.
Yeah. So you can listen to loudspeakers, you can listen to binaural, you can do all of that, right? Okay.
And spending
awesome.
a lot of time in binaural. I mean, at the end of the day, most people will be listening to it that way.
Sure. On AirPod Pros or absolutely. So I want to transition again a little bit into a little more kind of concrete ideas, and because again, there's people that are starting, and this can be kind of daunting. And so I want to kind of start with a simple conversation about some of the elements that you recorded and then we're placing. And I thought it would be just, one of the foundational elements, obviously, is the acoustic bass. It's an important part of, and just a disclaimer, you're not going to hear playback because we don't want you to hear playback over Zoom. But the beauty of this is in a couple of weeks, we're actually going to have access to the sessions, the actual print sessions in Atmos that Mark has so kindly allowed us to let you guys have to work with to see what he did. So basically, my question is going to be this. We've got the session up. We're looking at the renderer now. And the question is simple. However, it is, you have choices, you have aesthetic choices, you have creative choices, and this is a simple thing as a bass that's placed in relatively center, right? But it is an object, it's not a bed, it is scaled a little bit, it's not totally on the front wall, there is additional sends like for LFE and things. So my question is, how do you navigate all of those levers to kind of figure out where you're going to place that element? And again, it is a foundational element, it's low frequency. You know what I mean? It's not about it's not putting the levers in one particular direction, right? It's doing it, aesthetically. So.
Yeah, I think the discussion, because this was tracked live as well, a lot of those decisions get made for you. So where is this not competing? Where is this already, there's going to be bleed. We couldn't even use the neck mic for anything except bass solos because it really just it wasn't pleasing at all. So it filters in and out. But when you have the front to back in particular playing with the drums to the bass, you just kind of flip back and forth. Where is this speaking and not getting lost with the kick and snare? It could end up being very much like the kick and the snap of the snare. Well, that's my definition. That's my low end. Where is that? And it ended up being, I believe that the drums ended up being slightly lifted in many ways. And this could kind of just be that center stage foundational, like a post, and everything else can kind of be hung from it.
Sure. Yeah. And one thing to kind of reiterate that's kind of a thread throughout this whole project is, again, back to, it's jazz, maybe similar to choral or classical music, and you're creating an image, you're creating a space, right, for these instruments to live in. I guess, what is your objective on the project for how you want things, how you want to paint that space?
Yeah, I do enjoy that aspect of Atmos. Ultimately, I mean, of course, as you said, it's really great when you have a project that requires things spinning around your head and doing all these things. Those are awesome. They are very, very fun to listen to, but it's because the music itself requires it, and you'd be doing something approximating in stereo that would be that much movement and so on. When you do have things that are still static, I don't think that that's any less pleasing, I guess. So just having this kind of depth, this kind of hug of sound, and then the ceiling and the rears end up just kind of you feel it more, and I do enjoy that aspect. And that's hard to do when you're not looking at something in a straight line. The band was not set up flat. They were not on a stage. We were in a studio and people were all over the place, and it was how are these going to work together? And this is how it just kind of the jigsaw ended up snapping together.
Can you talk a little bit more about the binaural? Because as you said, it's really important. And a lot of people are listening on AirPod Pros. And so just briefly about, you have to listen on loudspeakers and really, whether you've got a 714 or 914 or 916, whatever you've got, you that's really the most precise way to mix in Atmos. But then you've got to think about compatibility with the binaural. So how did you approach that, and what decisions did you make? What did you change, as you're getting happy with the binaural mix?
Sure. I spend a lot of time on headphones, not least of all because I am mixing quite a lot at home, and I do have neighbors, and I try to be a good neighbor.
Yeah.
But also it's very important. I feel like I can make an awful lot of moves in the binaural renderer. I can say, audition something like a near, mid, or a far, and I kind of know what that sounds like in my speakers. So there's a little bit of an advantage of that. I do know what it sounds like in my room. But
Sure.
Throughout the mix, I do still flip back and forth when it comes to mix down. In particular with this, the other engineer, Dan Merriman, was crucial in this because we were sending each other MP4s back and forth. And it was just, hey, what does this sound like on your AirPod Pros? Why don't you flip this onto, plug this into your sound bar?
Or
yeah.
Sure.
And it was this very collaborative thing just by sending an MP4 back and forth.
Right.
And of course, that has an awful lot to do with what's happening with the binaural renderer. Not as much for the Apple side of things is my understanding, but we still had a lot of changing of, do we want to keep something stereo? Do we want to split it into dual mono? Where are things going? Where are we painting this? And that has an awful lot to do with the binaural settings, and a lot less to do with the speakers. You can kind of get away with slightly more in the speakers. It kind of all sounds amazing. And then you put on headphones and say, oh, well, that's not going to translate very well.
Awesome. Yeah. So there's some QC that you can do by leveraging AirPod Pros or media server or soundbar, throw an MP4 over here, listen here, right? Yeah. So
very frequently. Cool. I'll print, share to my phone. My phone, I can check on the soundbar. I can check on my headphones. And then I will even make a further tweak. You can even get a client saying, why do I have mix test 1.4? And you're like, well, the other ones were not worth listening to, I promise you. But it's kind of my own, I've already gone through quite a lot of QC because this is how they're going to listen to it, but it didn't destroy anything on my end for a larger system.
You got it. Yeah. Let's pivot a little bit into recording because, I think the tracks sound amazing, especially the piano. There's two tracks, there's Space and Time, and then there's Blue Dream. But I think the piano is just marvelous in Space and Time. It just really sounds amazing. And it's just, you're there. It's like you're literally sitting in the room watching her play. Kudos to that. But I guess talk a little bit about this. Again, it's back to the space for me, right? You've got some traditional miking techniques, and you've got some Blum lines, but then you're also doing some spatial stuff with ambisonics. Maybe talk about kind of trying to capture the space and trying to represent the piano.
Sure. I mean, with this type of recording, it does very much help with, step one, have an amazing piano tuner. Step two, have an amazing pianist. Lovely touch. Yeah. And then step three, don't mess it up. So we have very traditional things, but the way that those translate to Atmos is really excellent. You don't have to have a lot of the Blum line in there in order to fill in that gap. But when it comes to something like ambisonic, many of the songs we started tracking, it was in the middle of the room, and it was kind of acting more like a drum room mic. And when we came to, there's two tracks on this EP, which is out now. You can listen to these final mixes as well on streaming platforms. But when we came to two of them, they had large piano intros, and it was just, oh man, well, we have to. This is a good time to change. So we set it up kind of player's perspective overhead, and giving that kind of space behind, that kind of, you're sat at at the keyboard, you are the pianist, gave a really lovely spread. There's something about pianos being recorded poorly. You can have traditional all day long if it just kind of feels like here's a lot of these low ones, and then it skips and you're in the upper register, and you miss this gap. And having that fill in and also give a backsplash to the wall, that meant a lot to it. And you don't need a lot of it. Sometimes being very delicate, just bring it up until it just kind of sings. Again, she has the lovely touch. All you have to do is say, where is that moment that it felt like you might have been standing behind her when she performed it?
Right. Yep. Yeah. Very cool. So I guess my next question is going to be about your approach to capturing, and so I can tell, and having talked with you, you have some film scoring techniques, and you're not just kind of approaching this as a traditional, I'm going to capture everything the way I would normally do if I'm going to mix a stereo record. So I guess,
Sure.
What are, I'm presuming that, some of these techniques kind of pay dividends at the back end when you're starting to place elements in space and thinking about Atmos and having the ability to take a 5.0, let's say from a double MS, or, make a 712 out of a quad from the ambisonic, like all these techniques you can then, did you experiment with these and then you keep experimenting on the next project? What's your approach?
Yeah. Again, this came very much out of that original idea of, we'll do a VR project. And so you're like, okay, we'll look into some of these things. You're like, this translates excellent to Atmos. So things like the ambisonic recording, that really, really helps. The double MS is really cool too. Of course, you don't have height, but there's a lot of things that can be done to cheat that as well. I think it just comes down to, if you have an excellent player, why not get it for free now?
Sure.
Mic it the way, here it is, stock. This is a great, if we're going to rely on this room, let's really capture that room. And then you make decisions a little bit more like production. What are you intending to be big? What is meant to be roomy? What is meant to be tight? And you act accordingly. If it's not going to be, in this session, we wanted to try it out on drums and piano, and the bass wasn't really meant to be picked up that way. The saxophone was really cornered off, but that just led us to say, well, the saxophone could be really cool if we reamped it in the corridor and then use the ambisonic microphone to pick it up. So now we have this.
That's really cool.
This is a chamber that no one else has. This is Midtown sound. This is just walking up, and it's just happenstance, right? This is walking upstairs to the flat that I was staying in while I was here for the sessions. This sounds great. We should track something here. And so you send it normally. Delayed it a bunch and send it in, and we're saying this was sectioned off so it could have its own space. But now the sax has a feature. It didn't get picked up on the tracking side, but it's now this feature where it has its own space that no one else shares. No one else got sent that, just the sax.
Yeah, those are the types of techniques, creative recording techniques, I think, that are fantastic and often free, and don't require a whole bunch of fiddling with plugins and things like that, and often can yield better results than taking something and adding a bunch of verb or ambience or delays or something to it after the fact.
Definitely, and it's unique. If you're in your practice area and you're used to listening to your band this way, or you're at a club that you frequent and you're able to record something there, set up some extra mics in the back, and 2-4 mics pointed against the wall. All of a sudden you have what that ambience is, and you just essentially put those in the rear wall. What does that sound like? Point some things to the ceiling. It doesn't have to be, we had an incredibly nice mic locker to work from, and I brought some of my own mics, but grab some 57s or whatever you have. I'm sure that you can get creative with it, and it will be unique. It will be your space.
Right. Yeah. I think you told me about kind of happy accidents with regard to the mics that you put up that ended up being very useful for the sound of the drum kit. But I think weren't they initially kind of intended for something with the Rhodes? Wasn't that the original kind of conversation? Or
Sure. So with the Rhodes, what we ended up with was something that was clean. So they had we put the amp in the, I don't know if you can see, just behind in this picture there's an ISO booth. So we had this area that now the sax was cornered off, the bass wasn't hitting too hard, and we had these extra room mics. And now the drums were able to experience that. So when I'm saying like mic the rear wall, what we had was kind of an ambio square. And so we had this square of, I believe they were Bear Dynamic M160s, the hypercardioid ribbons. And they were measured and balanced facing the piano. So it was catching the splash from the drums. We also then did have the ambisonic up. So you ended up with these, well, that's for free. You know, the Rhodes can live in its own space because it was DI'd and had a mic in an ISO booth.
Sure.
But if you look at that project, when you open it up, it's just in the rear. You can see the square of dots. Does that make sense? You can see the points where those objects are in the rear wall. That is just that's just for free. You have that. We didn't have to do as many, as much with the reverbs or anything. Same thing with the ceiling. I believe there's some funky things happening with that in the ceiling that they didn't go where we expected them to go, but that's fine too. You know, as long as it sounds nice.
So I think we were talking about a little bit of the drums, and I think you kind of got into that discussion. So here's my next like little segue. How are we doing? We're doing pretty good on time. And I kind of wanted to there's, again, the technology is the technology, the art is the art, and you don't have to use everything, right? You can use some artificial reverbs. You can certainly capture as much real space as you can. There's beds, there's objects, there's object arrays or object beds. There's all kinds of different techniques if you scour YouTube and actually look at some of the guys that have been doing it for a very long time. Like Greg Penny and Steve Genowick. But there's a lot of, I think of them as building blocks, and my kids have Legos, so I think in those terms. How to pick the right tool for the right job. So, for example, I mean, you're sending that bass to extra LFE to kind of add some low end. I know you're taking advantage of some special verbs like exponential and cinematic rooms, which are fun because they've got more precision in the Z, in the height. Yeah. But you're also leveraging real stuff as well, right? We've been talking about real acoustic space a lot. And then I think you're augmenting the real space with artificial or algorithmic space as well, right?
Yes. And yeah, building those things together. You can have multiple spaces working together and saying, oh, I just want this elongated, or this just needs to be special, or I want a bit more distance. You can kind of get some of that with artificial. And it's just balancing. You can kind of get most of the way, bring up your captured mic arrays up as far as you can, and as soon as it's done its job, if you feel like you need more, put something else on it. That's fine. Just layers and layers.
Has your approach changed to how you deal with space and these types of elements from when you started from Atmos and kind of from where you're at now?
Definitely. I definitely had much more of trying to cheat distance if it were a singer's too close on a mic and I need a little bit of space, or I'm not using as much of those short rooms in the same way that I did. They certainly still exist, but I feel like I use many of the same tools to different effect. And it's just, oh, well, this is how I'd normally use it, but it's doing something different because there's already neutral room. There's already, for the binaural, there's already kind of some of that stuff. Again, I'd like to say you get it for free. Like, I like the way this sounds. I just move something, I just pan it first before I affect anything. And
Sure.
well, it
Yeah.
already sounds great. So how much more do I need? I think that it has made me a little less heavy-handed.
Mm-hmm.
I've been accused of that before. It's nice to kind of be able to say, oh, to taste. And I think my
Yeah.
tastes have changed a little bit with that,
Mm-hmm.
which is really
Yeah.
interesting.
Definitely. I just wanted to kind of come put my tips hat on a little bit and just talk about, everybody doesn't have to go out and buy cinematic rooms or, Michael Carn's exponential reverbs, which are excellent. They're great, right? But you don't have to have these, special reverbs to do things in Atmos. I just kind of wanted to, there's certainly ways to leverage very inexpensive, excellent tools like the Valhalla stuff, and place those multiple versions of those in different places, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And that's, kind of a more creative way in your template to deal with space, as opposed to just saying, hey, I hope I get a 716 out of this, from one of those other tools.
Definitely. I also think that it's nice when you already have that taste. I already like this. I like using this Valhalla. I already like this, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You could just be deverb, whatever it is. I like this, and this is how I use it on my snare. Great. Well,
yeah.
How exploded do you want that? Sometimes that's I need it everywhere. Sometimes it's just I want it here and in the ceiling, and that's it. So it's half of the room. But you can play with it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be something purpose built. It's just those two are really nice, and I bought them. So
yeah, no, they're incredible. They're both outstanding tools. But just kind of wanted to show other people other ways to, you can create a quad. If you've got a 714, you can create a quad bus and move things just in the Z space. You can, put a low pass filter to darken up the rears, right? And there's all kinds of things you can do creatively that you don't just have to use one particular tool. I think that was kind of the point.
Yeah, and that layering idea. Layer. You can have multiple just like you would. You can use just whatever tools you have. There's nothing wrong with that. They all sound great.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. With that said, though, there are some incredible tools out there, like Slapper from Cargo Cult, which is brilliant, and it's a multi-channel delay. And if you're looking for something really special, that's one of those very special things. So I had to have a slide about the Hamasaki square, Hamasaki cube, because it was so interesting. And again, it's back to the idea of, I guess the question is, thinking about Atmos when you're cutting, when you're capturing, right? That's kind of, I want to bring it back to that, because again, if you think about all these things when you're recording, you have more possible creative things you can do, right, at the mix stage, right?
Yeah, definitely. In this particular instance, you have a jazz group playing live, and they're not straight across. So Hamasaki cube becomes challenging in that. So it doesn't become very useful until you're capturing something that you can keep at the same time. If you are doing just the drums, that is a really interesting way to kind of capture your ambience. This is what this room sounds like. And it's different. It does sound different to the ambisonic. It does sound different to other methods. But if you don't, my philosophy is if you don't know what that sounds like, it's going to be very difficult to want to go to that place instinctively. It's like if this ambisonic mic is not doing the trick for whatever you're trying to capture, you have a choir or a string quartet that's being added to your metal track. It doesn't matter what it is.
Sure. Yeah.
If you haven't heard it, why would you know to go to it? So it was very helpful for us to do that for a drum kit, and to hear what that also sounded like as the piano room mic.
Yeah.
But it comes from production. So I do a lot of productions where we are thinking about what's going to be big in Atmos, what is going to be mono, what is going to be singular. Sometimes we have multiple mics on a piano, and sometimes in a pop track we're saying, yeah, that's just going to be a single point source there, so we may as well mic it mono because that's all we want. Yeah. So choosing those a little bit in pre-production does go a long way. It saves a lot of time because these arrays do take a bit to set up.
Yeah, certainly. Excellent. Um, okay, yeah, that's kind of more about the same conversation. But I think what we want to do, I've got more than I can deal with. But I think what we want to do is engage some of the people that have so kindly joined in, and maybe ask some questions that are on here that I think would be worth discussing. So let me just take a quick gander at um, looking at some questions. Okay, so Dayton Warner asks, is it really necessary to have the same size monitors all around in Atmos, or do we just need L&R the same and LR, the rears the same and the tops the same? What are your thoughts?
I don't use all the same. I have all the same for anything except everything except for the front. So I have
Mm-hmm.
eights, the what are they? A8X, and then the rest are the fives.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty typical. I don't think that it's crucial. I mean, it's more crucial that you set it up properly. Take the time to set it up properly, tune it. I think that's probably more important. And listen to music in that space.
Sure. Sure. We talked, I mean, I know previously about kind of the importance of the LCR and really that foundational wall. So
Yeah,
I would say your LCR should probably be identical, match speakers. And I know in your case, that's a really important plane in the Atmos environment, right?
definitely. I also find that I'm in need maybe of wides. I do very much
Yeah,
like, particularly with
sure.
a lot of the indie artists I work with. They
Mm-hmm.
have these really interesting guitar parts that just getting just outside. It's that thing that you really try to master for or mix for, trying to go just outside your speakers. That those
Mm-hmm.
wides really do feel great. And so yeah, I would say that that would be the next step on my front, because that's so important. It's less
Yeah.
important to me that things always feel like they're flying over my head, and that this
Mm-hmm.
kind of curvature feels good.
Right. Yeah. So you're talking specifically about basically transitioning from the 714 to either the 914 or the 916, and the
Yeah,
wides kind of come out. And actually, we can show a picture of that. But basically, yeah, there's a lot of music mixers that, well, not just music, post as well, that for score for the score, actually bringing the musical elements out further, is very very is a great technique.
and it
Um,
clears way for things like dialogue. It clears way for sound effects. You have this clarity because no one's stepping on each other. You can feel it
mhm.
more.
Let's see here. A couple more questions. Hugo Hernandez, what monitor settings do you use to mix in your home? After mixing at home, your mix modified or readjusted in a professional studio?
I just mix at home. I also have sound treatment up. I do have everything tuned. I do have 714 here at home, so it's mostly done here at home. And there are plenty of mixes that have gone out directly from here to the outside world. This is actually one of the few instances that it isn't. It has gone back and forth to St.
Hmm.
Louis to get approval, which is amazing because then the band can approve uh, listening in a room.
Sure.
But no, I don't think it's necessary. But on a larger project, if you are having multiple tracks, there should be some sort of a quality control stage, um,
Hmm.
as you normally would. You can say if you make everything at -18, then when you go back to listen to it, it will not have an album flow because you don't have the ride of the record. You don't have some tracks that are more intimate and maybe quieter, and then something that punches louder. It's just everything
Hmm.
is all over the place. So
Yeah.
-18 being kind of like a ceiling is more important. So if you can afford it, definitely get. There are mastering engineers out there that are now doing that, and I would definitely recommend it,
Mhm.
but have to feels a little much for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Brian Montgomery, how do your clients listen to your mix to approve it? What format do you send? And do they need special hardware to listen to it? Is there a way to send them a binaural mix for approval?
Yeah, I used to send a stereo and a binaural. And I've kind of done away with that since Apple has done spatial audio. I
Mm-hmm.
have sent now more the MP4 and just kind of say, please listen on headphones. If you have a sound bar that's
Mm-hmm.
Atmos compatible, this is how you can do that. Certainly if you have an iPhone, it a little bit becomes a bit of a tutorial in your email. Here's this new mix. Here's a bunch of things. But if you don't give them the
Right.
information, then you can't expect someone to have detailed notes. So it's a bit of a challenge. But again, if not everyone is quite at the stage where you're listening on even sound bars, the headphone mix is still excellent. And that seems to be the middle ground is the MP4. It gives a good
Mm-hmm.
and accurate representation. I've gotten decent notes from that.
So, a little bit more into the binaural, and I know Apple has a slightly different kind of take on that. I think Alex from YouTube is asking, since Apple ignores the binaural settings from the mix session and creates its own 514 specialized sound, what binaural settings from the mix session translate over to Apple's spatial audio?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can speak to exactly the technical, if it's full. I'm not listening to the binaural settings at all, but I do think that there is a difference. But that's kind of why I use the MP4, because that really does seem to be incredibly similar, if not exact, to what I'm
Yeah.
hearing out of my soundbar, having now MP4s of things that are already released. So I'm able to listen
Mm-hmm.
to an artist I've already worked with and say, that's what it sounds like already streaming. And here is the MP4 of the exact same file. You're like, okay, I can see it.
Mm-hmm.
So does it make for some challenges when you're doing something in the minutia, saying this is far, this is near? Yeah, a little bit, but again, lesser of all evils. If you can kind of make sure that it sounds great on your binaural playback, in my case, it's through Dadman listening to headphones, and then I have an export to my phone, and then I listen on my AirPod Pros.
Mm-hmm.
As long as it's not wildly off, I tend to then just keep it. That's a good point to start sending to clients.
Got it. Alexander Mullis asks, is phase, polarity, alignment crucial in Atmos mixing? Does it make a bigger difference than stereo polarity?
I don't know bigger difference, but I think polarity and phase relationships are important generally. So is it when you're talking about microphone arrays? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I mean, you don't want that anyway, right? It 9 times out of 10, your kick, snare, and your bass and your vocal are all going to occupy some sort of a space. If you have 2 mics on the bass, you're going to want that to be in polarity. You want them to also then be in phase with each other. So
Sure.
yeah, I don't know if more necessary. Actually, I think you could probably cheat it a little bit more. You can got to get away with more.
Mm-hmm.
By placing it so far away from things, but yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
worth the effort.
Here's a good question that's just useful. With Atmos mix, is there a method for what goes where in terms of outputs, or it's just a choice?
For outputs, I imagine that's to the binaural renderer.
No, I think my interpretation of his question is really, how do I know where to put stuff? And so what I was going to ask you is, should I put the acoustic bass in the center of the room at the full height?
Give it a go. Have a listen, and then say, yeah, maybe I won't put that there. I'm gonna
take it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I like to approach my mixes by first starting to pan things.
Mm-hmm.
Drastic panning can be fun, but start moving subtly first and find where
Yeah.
things are. It's usually you're dealing with this kind of front curve. I go to about 66 where things are kind of feeling like it's just around the bend and everything feels great to me. And then sometimes it's drastic, but to me, it has more to do with the height. You go until you say, all right, it's falling apart. And then you bring it to where it sounds good. Now you can start EQing, compressing, doing anything that you need to. And yeah, is there a reason to put an acoustic bass in the ceiling? I don't see why, but yeah.
Yeah.
Have a
John,
method to the madness if you can.
yeah, absolutely. So if you're doing a lot of listening in binaural on your system at home, I guess John Crossley asks, what would you say the best headphones for mixing are? And is that the answer is just whatever you're comfortable with, right?
Yeah, I would say the ones you know. If you're comfortable with a certain set of headphones, don't throw a new headphone into the curve as well. You already have the renderer and how things sound in Atmos to worry about. You definitely don't need.
Yeah.
And then I have to get used to these new headphones, expensive or cheap. It doesn't matter. It's new.
Yeah. Yeah. Another, and this is fortuitous, but the re-renders, right? Basically, one of the cool things about this format is the idea of, kind of intelligent re-rendering or recomputation of the master mix into different flavors. So this is showing like a binaural, a 5.1, a 7.1, 7.1.4, a stereo, and you can listen to all of those flavors. Do you ever listen to the 5.1? For example, in a project?
Yeah, definitely. I flip between the binaural, the stereo. Usually the 7.1. Don't know why. That just tends to be the thing. Maybe it's just because my layout is a 7.1. But yeah, it becomes the physical, and then those other things. I tend to mix for Atmos and then deliver something. Even if somebody says, I have this stereo project, I'm still mixing it in Atmos, and then here's the stereo re-renderer. And obviously, if that's the mix that they are most concerned with, better sound good in stereo as well. So yeah, a lot of monitoring.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
But that
will
also help with the scalability as well. If somebody doesn't have as many speakers as that, just knowing that things fold down in many ways definitely helps.
Right. So is every new project that you take on, are you thinking about Atmos, even if they're just initially thinking about putting it into a stereo domain?
Definitely. I think there's only been maybe two mixes, like a Christmas compilation. Somebody had done something for it, last minute charity single that it was like, okay, we got to just do this really quick. That was done in stereo, and I want to say that there was something else, but everything else I've done in the last year and a half at least has all been Atmos, whether they asked for it or not.
Sure. Awesome.
Because I like mixing in it. I find it to be more creative. So I'm going to do it because I'll get to the end of my day sooner and be pleased with my product, even if it's stereo.
Hey, that's cool. I mean, that's awesome.
I also don't fancy somebody coming back and saying, oh, I really want this in Atmos, and then being like, oh, I got to redo this. Or, now we'll have to scale it. Be like, no, I already made those decisions. Here you go. Here's your ADM. Right. Go for it.
There's a question that came in. What about loudness when you mix or master immersive audio? Is the standard the same as mixing and mastering in stereo?
I try to do as much loudness monitoring, checking for -18 while I'm mixing. But then, yeah, there is a process at the end that is, okay, what is meant to be the loudest track? I'll keep that one at as loud as it can be without breaking rules. Don't need anything sent back saying I can't distribute. And then I find what goes underneath that. And then I just play with VCAs until the record feels like the right flow. Even though everyone's just going to listen to whatever single, but records mean something to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to the there's no there's no rule book for Atmos. Barry Rudolph asks, is using only the LFE and only objects for the rest a viable approach for Atmos music mixing? And I know there's a lot of different schools of thought here about, objects, object beds, and then, hey, I'm just going to use the LFE channel from the primary bed. And there's a lot of different approaches. So tell us what your take is.
Yeah, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to approach that. I think that if you feel like the object bed works for you, then go for it. Absolutely. And if you have a very good reason for that, absolutely you should do that. I don't know if I just don't fully understand the object bed or what that is, but I do use the bed. I even use an effects bed, which just kind of spawned out of showing somebody else that happened to be in the room that's in more of a post-production. It's like, yeah, you can set up multiple beds and this is how you do it. And then it just kind of stayed in the session. But it's kind of nice. It's like, oh, here, this is where these go. And I still need objects for some of the ceiling things, for cinematic rooms and things like that. But yeah, I use the bed, but I do filter my LFE. I don't just send the LFE, I do filter it. But again, I feel like that's just what I've kind of stumbled upon, and it's always changing. In 2 months' time, I might say, oh, object bed. My brain it's exploding with ideas because I don't know. It's always changing, and my templates are all over the place. If I opened up one from last year, I would say, why did I do it that way? So
I think my opinion, and not that anybody asked, but I love experimentation.
What is your opinion, Jeff?
Well, no, I think where we're at in Atmos music right now is a little bit of a wild, wild west, but that's kind of fun because there is not one right answer, and there's different approaches, and people are sharing mixes and sharing ideas, and it's an exploratory, it's a journey. I think that's really cool personally. Since you asked, Mark.
Yes, and engineers and artists alike are sharing that, and the artist might not come at it from a technical perspective, but I work with an art pop band, Yes Factory, that is like, how can we do this drum circle with an ambisonic mic, and can we do and I'm like, let's try to break it. I don't know, like,
yeah, right.
Sure. I don't see why not. We can try that, to your point of putting a bass in the ceiling. Yeah, we'll do it. I don't know why we do that. And like, oh, that sounds terrible. Like, yeah, I know, but we tried it, Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, a couple last questions, and then we'll kind of wrap up here. Keenan asks, how do your Atmos mixes translate in stereo?
I hope well. As I do monitor it quite frequently, it is a little strange to listen to it without bus processing. Haven't really cracked that yet for my personal workflow. So it is kind of like, does this sound good in stereo, knowing that I'm going to be putting some mixed bus processing on it? Because it's not always applicable. You do want a different curve, maybe. Typically, I need a little bit more high end. I need a little bit more of this. A little bit of compression for excitement. I get a lot of excitement and dynamics out of Atmos, but when it folds down to stereo, I kind of want to recoup some of that. So I hope it sounds good. Certainly, this project, it is out right now, so listen to it in Atmos. And Dan Merman, he mastered it as well. It is the stereo re-render of the project. So you tell me, how does it translate? I hope well.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you spending some time with us. We just kind of want to bring everything back to, it's all about the music. They're creative tools. We have a whole bunch of technology, but it's really in service of the music. And so try some things, experiment, work with some other people, kind of, again, share MP4s and think about Atmos when you're recording. Think about Atmos not just when you're mixing, when you've got a bunch of mono and stereo things you now need to Atmosify. It's great to repurpose a catalog, but it's better to even think about it at the stage where you've got got, modular synths, and you've got microphone arrays, and then you have so many more, creative options when you actually get to mixing. So we want to thank
just
Mark.
Tracking. No, I just mean to say, I've been enjoying a lot of production. We're starting from scratch, saying, I have this little acoustic idea. What are we going to do in Atmos with it? And so we start building these tracks based on that for another time, I suspect.
Awesome. Well, thank you to Mark very much for hanging out with us, and thank you to everybody that stopped by. And stay tuned. In a couple weeks, we're going to have access to not only the recording of this, but access to the actual print sessions from both of those two tracks. So on behalf of myself and Avid, thanks very much.
Thank you.